analysis is when you don't read too much into a situation. I've seen all sorts of conversations about why Iran did what it did. And the more I've thought through this and having seen the inside for a while, I think they've just made a mistake. It's as simple as that.
Sri Lanka, you name it, and all the other countries are not at the expense of the fundamental legitimate interests of any other country in Southeast Asia. But China does not believe that.
Pakistan was flustered and completely taken aback that one nuclear country would wake up in the middle of the night and attack another nuclear country across the international border. Nothing could be more stupid and risky.
Hello and welcome to Info Talks, a podcast where I put you in the room with some of the biggest thought leaders from around the world. Today I'm joined by two distinguished panelists for this special edition. Joining us from China is Victor Gao, Chair Professor at Suzhou University and Vice President, Center for China and Globalization. And from Pakistan, I have former National Security Advisor and President Beacon House National University, Dr. Moeed Yusuf. Gentlemen, welcome to Info Talks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, Mr. Gao, let's go ahead and start this conversation with you first. Right now, we actually see the Middle East and the Arab Gulf. It's kind of engulfed in this ongoing crisis due to breakout of hostilities between Israel and Palestine. In all of this situation where there is a serious risk of a regional conflagration between different countries, what is China's position and what do you read as your country's position to be on this crisis overall?
Thank you very much for having me. What's happening in Palestine, especially in Gaza and the West Bank, are really human tragedies. And mankind as a whole should not tolerate any violation of the basic rights of the Palestinian people. From the Chinese perspective, China has been urging for ceasefire from the very beginning of the outbreak of the hostilities in Gaza. And China has been promoting the two-state solution, restoring the border of Palestine to 1967 and using East Jerusalem as the capital city for the state of Palestine. China didn't adopt this policy as of October the 7th, 2023. This has been China's policy for the previous several decades. And I would say China is truly a real friend of the Palestinian people. And China has always emphasized that to protect the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people is as important as protecting the legitimate rights of the Israeli people. You cannot just treat the Israelis as human beings and treat the Palestinians as subhuman beings. That's not the right way to do things involving the Palestinian people. I think mankind should really demand that equal treatment of the Palestinian people and the Israelis should be done at the same time. And this is China's position. And China also urges all parties involved to stop fighting, stop war hostilities, one kind of another as soon as possible, because the current situation really has all the ingredients of escalating out of control and turning this Israeli-Palestinian war into a wider regional conflict and even bring it to a global dimension. So ceasefire as quickly as possible, no more hostilities, and the complete withdrawal of Israeli soldiers from Gaza. This is the minimum that we as mankind together need to demand from the state of Israel.
Dr. Moeed, let me come to you, and we've seen some signs of spillover of this conflict. On January 16, we saw Iran actually carry out strikes on Pakistani soil in Panjgur, and in retaliation, we saw Pakistan swiftly respond back. What do you think has really happened over the years that has led to Pakistan adopt a very different posture this time around when Iran actually carried out its strikes on Pakistani soil?
Sama, first of all, I think sometimes the best analysis is when you don't read too much into a situation. I've seen all sorts of conversations about why Iran did what it did. And the more I've thought through this and having seen the inside for a while, I think they've just made a mistake. It's as simple as that. I think they've overplayed their hand. perhaps because they were looking for a diversion from the global pressure or the Western pressure they have because of the situation in Yemen and linked to the Middle East. And it just seems to me to be one of those decisions that were perhaps disjointed, not well thought out, and sometimes elite decision making does suffer from this. So I don't want to read too much beyond that. I think they've made a mistake, and I hope they've realized it. As far as Pakistan's response is concerned, I think it was exactly the right one. It was commensurate. It was targeted. It did not seek to inflict any undue harm. And also, I think, Usama, over the years, since you're mentioning, there's been this narrative, underlying narrative, oh, the Pakistani state talks but doesn't act. And for a country that's situated in such a difficult region, not to establish its credibility of its deterrence is very, very dangerous, because then other adversaries, India being a great example, take advantage of that and feel emboldened. So I think the response was needed. Unfortunately, Iran had not left Pakistan with any choice. But I'm very happy to see that it was very targeted against actors who had been undermining security in Pakistan and nothing more. I'm not a person who advocates military action under any circumstance, but sometimes it becomes necessary for a country to establish the fact that it will defend its sovereignty under any circumstances.
Now, thankfully, the crisis has actually de-escalated. But what do you really see is the alternative available to both countries to address their mutual security concerns?
Look, I mean, both countries, it's a natural sort of convergence of interest in terms of talking and finding ways to move forward. Iran is globally isolated. Pakistan has had problems with its neighbors to the east and west, but Pakistan also espouses a geo-economic vision where it wants to connect to the region. I think the way forward, even within the sanctions regime, is to talk, to have dialogue, and to resolve issues based on that. Unfortunately, there isn't a strong relationship when it comes to trade and economics. It can't be because of the sanctions on Iran. And perhaps one of the reasons it became the decision Iran took was the decision it did was because there isn't much to lose in the relationship. But frankly, that's regressive and that's myopic thinking. What we should really be thinking about is, if both countries want connectivity, then whenever the time is right, they should be prepared to take advantage of that moment, not have an acrimonious relationship. So it's very unfortunate what's happened, and I'm glad that they're talking now, and it seems that we've moved past this. But one just hopes that there are enough crisis management mechanisms or prevention mechanisms that we don't get to this no matter what.
Now, Mr. Gaul, China and the United States were among the two countries who actually called for de-escalation as the crisis was unfolding. What role do you think can China really play, from crises like these, from re-emerging between Pakistan and Iran? And do you really see any role being played by multilateral organization like, say, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, of which China, Iran, and Pakistan all seem to be a member of?
Well, China feels very sorry to see the hostilities between Iran and Pakistan that have taken place in recent days. Pakistan is a staunch ally of China, and we have this all-weather friendship and cooperation with each other. And the two countries and the Pakistani people, the Chinese people, really value our solidarity a lot. And I would say China will spare no efforts in supporting the legitimate goals of Pakistan in all respects. On the other hand, Iran has always been a very important friendly country to China. China supports Iran in many respects, even though Iran has been suffering the sanctions imposed on Iran by the United States in particular, and many other Western countries. Therefore, it pains China a lot to see the hostilities flaring up between Iran and Pakistan. I would dare to say that China would do whatever it can to make sure that Iran and Pakistan can get over these hostilities against each other for whatever reason. And China believes that the greater cooperation and friendship between Iran and Pakistan will be truly very important, not only for these two great countries, each of which is China's friend, but also for the general friendship and cooperation among all the Muslim countries and also the whole region in that part of the world. Keep in mind that both Iran and Pakistan are members of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. We do have enough framework and platform to work out the differences between Iran and Pakistan, and hopefully if China can really mediate a better solution of this conflict, China will be very happy to do so. And hopefully this will be to the benefit of both Iran on the one hand and Pakistan on the other hand.
Now, Mr. Gao, speaking of the other aspect of the great power contestation that we really see unfolding, we've actually seen some headway between U.S. and China as well. Both President Xi and Biden carried out a meeting under the rubric of APEC summit that was held in November 2023 in San Francisco. Have you really seen any major breakthrough take place as a result of those talks? Although we've seen some headway and continuation of talks take place from 2022 as well, and the 2023 as well, in military matters, on matters of treasury and finance and climate change as well. But has there been any major breakthrough under these bilateral talks between President Xi and Biden?
Well, the summit meeting between President Biden of the United States and the Chinese President Xi Jinping in November 2023 in San Francisco was a very important political event in China-US bilateral relations, both in terms of optics as well as in terms of the substance. Now, whether the United States talked the right long walk subsequent to the San Francisco summit meeting, that's another matter. We really need to observe what the United States is doing very closely and make sure that they not only talk the right talk, but also walk the right walk in dealing with major issues in China-US relations. I would say I'm very confident about the medium and longer term relations between China and the United States, because I'm a firm believer of the inevitability of peace between China and the United States, which is in rebuke of the fallacy of destined for war scenario between China and the United States. I do believe war is not and should not be an option between China and the United States. And whatever differences there are between China and the United States, we need to resolve these differences in peace by engagement. And the fact that China and the United States had a lot of very high level of meetings in Beijing as well as in Washington throughout 2023, culminating in the summit meetings in San Francisco, is a strong indication that there are indeed channels of communication between China and the United States. Both countries are eager to prevent a complete derailing of the relations, which will be a disaster for both China and the United States and mankind as a whole. After all, China and the United States are the two largest economies in the world. The size of the Chinese economy already surpassed that of the United States in terms of purchasing power parity as of 2013. And I will not be surprised if we use the official exchange rate as the benchmark. The size of the Chinese economy will surpass that of the United States around 2030. Therefore, it will be futile for some of the decision makers in Washington try to impose sanctions against China in the belief that they can bring China down. No, I think China will continue to develop, and the Chinese economy will sooner or later surpass that of the United States in terms of the official exchange rate measurement. And I think the diversities and the differences between China and the United States should really not be a problem which will divide us. It should actually be what will unite us, and the world will be a better and safer place if China and the United States can eventually resolve their differences in peace. And that will be a good signal for the rest of the world, because if China and the United States really go separate ways and engage in war with each other, it will be catastrophe and Armageddon for mankind as a whole. I truly believe that will not happen, and the rest of the world should have enough confidence that China and the United States will have the wisdom and the courage and the resources to eventually get along with each other despite of their differences.
Now, Dr. Mohit, I want your opinion on a recent development that has taken place in the region of South Asia itself. We've seen the Maldivian president, newly elected President Mohamed Muizzu, who's actually asked Indian troops to withdraw from the archipelago nation by March 15th. He's recently actually carried out a visit to China as well, which sort of reflects a pivot towards China. Why do you think the archipelago nation, Maldives, has taken an assertive stance on its neighbor India?
Osama, I would explain this to you through structural realism. Look, I mean, this is not one event. You've got to look at it as a pattern. What's happening in South Asia? You've got India that has considered itself the natural, quote unquote, hegemon for the region for the longest period. The only exception that's stood up and stood out is Pakistan. And the others perhaps are not of a size or strength to challenge that view of India. So they've always been, in India's mind, satellites in the region. Maldives, of course, and Bhutan being the smallest ones. Now comes along China. And as China and India's competition is intensifying, the region is going to be the first theater for that. And what you will see is these smaller nations actually trying to either balance or to reach out to one versus the other as they try and extract as much benefits as they can from both India and China. One political government will come and see their country tilted too far towards one actor, and they will try and compensate and rebalance. So what you're seeing in Maldives right now is this angst. It was boiling, simmering for a while, where India was being seen as too dominant and too controlling and too interfering. And so you've seen now a pivot towards China to open up that space further. I suspect we haven't seen the last of this. This pattern will continue, and the smaller states will continue seesawing, trying to create an equilibrium where they can benefit from both larger actors while maintaining their sovereignty. And I think Maldives had gone too far in the other direction, and this is perhaps a correction. Later on, a few years down the line, depending on what happens in domestic politics in Maldives, you may see a recorrection to the other side. And this is not only Maldives, you will continue to see this in the entire South Asian sphere, especially countries apart from Pakistan that are smaller and have been under India's in India's orbit, if you will.
Now, Mr. Gao, in the meantime, as we actually see this development take place, and by March 15, if we are likely to see the Indian troops withdraw from the island nation, let me ask you: would China be stepping up, trying to fill the gap in terms of that role, in terms of taking a security role within the archipelago nation?
From a Chinese perspective, all these countries in South Asia, including Maldives and Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bhutan, and Bangladesh and Pakistan, you name it, they are all independent sovereign countries, and each need to be fully respected. And no one in South Asia has any natural or legal right to dictate that they should be subordinate to its dominance or hegemon. And I think that should be the rule of the game. And China respects every and each of the countries in South Asia and wants to develop mutually beneficial relations with them. China's relations with countries like Maldives or Bhutan or Sri Lanka, you name it, and all the other countries are not at the expense of the fundamental legitimate interests of any other country in South Asia. But China does not believe that any country in South Asia has any natural or legal right to dominate any other country in that part of the world. Each country should be fully respected, and they should be able to make decisions on their own in terms of their domestic policies as well as their foreign policies. And the fact that China has very good relations with many of the countries in South Asia is something to be very much of a great pride, because that's a good reflection of what bilateral relations should be, because it's based purely on mutual respect mutual benefit without interfering in each other's internal affairs. And that should be an example for all the other bilateral relations involving other countries in South Asia, as well as in all the other parts of the world.
Now, Dr. Mohit, let's speak of another elephant in the room, and that is India and Pakistan relations. Do you really see any possibility of normalization of ties taking place in this year, 2024, between the two countries? And what do you think might be some of the biggest obstacles in that way?
I sure hope so. Look, I mean, for the longest period, South Asia's progress has been held hostage to the acrimony between India and Pakistan. I mean, that's the most known fact about this region, unfortunately. I see two realistic possibilities. One is a negative one. I am less worried about it now than I was maybe 3 months ago, but I still am, which is a possibility of some kind of crisis escalation, which is tied to Indian domestic politics. We all remember the Balakot strikes ahead of the Indian national election in 2019, which proved that the Indian government of the time, which is also the government right now, will do anything to distract from whatever domestic issues they may have. And Pakistan is a very popular domestic whipping boy for the BJP government. Unlike Pakistan, where India is not a domestic political issue anymore, in India, Pakistan persists to be one. So if there is a concern that northern Indian states may not vote the way the BJP wants, one can't completely rule that out. I say I'm a bit more confident because BJP seems to be doing far better than it was a few months ago, and it seems that they don't have a major challenge. But again, I'm not an expert in Indian politics, so I think one's got to keep an eye out for that. All Western countries that I know of this tendency of the BJP. They did conclude this after 2019 as well, and nobody wants a crisis. So that's the sort of negative part. The somewhat hopeful one, I do think that after the Indian elections, and there would have been a new Pakistan government by the time, I do think there is going to be better sense prevailing to say that maintaining the status quo and continuing to go like this is essentially hurting both countries reach their potential while the world moves on. Now, this is easier said than done. We all know how emotive this relationship is. We all know how ideological the BJP government is. We all know what kind of constraints there have been inside Pakistan in the past. And so one can't say that this will happen, but I think rationally, there needs to be a conversation that starts. Pakistan has offered dialogue, even when I was in government, time and again, but there's been a reluctance and sort of a block on the Indian side. It's not going to help India either at the end of the day. And to pretend that nothing further would go wrong, even if both sides never talk, I think we're living in fool's paradise. So I very much hope that there is an effort. I do think India will have to take the first step, given the context and the circumstances. But even if we are not looking for a major breakthrough, some conversation on the key issues has to begin for us to lower the temperature and find ways for progress. No guarantees at all, but maybe there'll be a window of opportunity after the Indian elections, depending on what happens.
Now, Dr. Mohit, let me draw your attention to a recent revelation which was actually made by, India's former High Commissioner to Pakistan, Ajay Bisaria, who in his book now claims that Pakistan was panicked as the Pulwama Balakot crisis unfolded. What is your assessment of that situation or of that crisis? You're someone who's, as a professional, has actually done a lot of work scholastically as well on crisis management related issues. Do you really think India's coercive diplomacy was successful towards Pakistan?
Slightly tongue-in-cheek comment, but if bringing down India's pilot is what Pakistan does when it's panicked, imagine what we can do when we are calm. This is crazy, and I think these things don't help. I respect the gentleman. I respect his view. He must have done his analysis. but there is a way to know whether that's true or not. And those who were inside the Pakistani system dealing with it do know that that wasn't the case. Look, um, you can change the word, but what I will acknowledge is that Pakistan was flustered and completely taken aback that one nuclear country would wake up in the middle of the night and attack another nuclear country across the international border. I mean, nothing could be more stupid and risky. So it's natural if we are not, if we didn't think this was out of the ordinary, then that won't make sense. So yes, we were flustered. We should have been not at what we would do, but why would a nuclear neighbor do something as crazy as that? Of course, we do know that this was linked to domestic politics in India, which makes it even worse. But look at the response. We waited that night. We, in a very restrained and mature manner, did not cross the international border, even the LOC. We struck down an enemy plane, which is exactly what a self-respecting nation would do if a thief enters their territory or somebody's house. We did not want to escalate, and it was proven clearly when we voluntarily handed over the pilot. And we again said after that that the way forward is conversation, not these kind of shenanigans. So I don't quite understand where that panic is. At least it's not evident in every action that Pakistan took. Why India would do something in the first place is the real question to answer. And that's, I think, an unanswered question that worry remains, at least in Pakistan, and I know in some other capitals as well. As far as the coercive diplomacy, look, somebody initiates an action, Pakistan responds, brings down a pilot, makes a point clearly that you cross threshold of entering into our territory, you will get a commensurate response. There's no nuclear escalation there. Pakistan's not crying bloody murder. This is exactly what a mature response is. Now, that said, if there's anybody in India who feels that despite Pakistan's response, and dare I say, huge embarrassment internationally for India, coercive diplomacy still works and will go unanswered, then I don't know what to say. All I can tell you is that everything that you look at from the outside in terms of the evidence of action, this was a fairly mature, restrained response. Now, both countries still need to talk and make sure that things never get to this point. And if there are misunderstandings on why these things are triggered, that's a conversation that needs to happen. And, I've already answered previously that I hope after the elections, there is some dialogue. I'm a big proponent of that, especially because Pakistan espouses a geo-economic vision where connectivity in the region is one of its key pillars.
Now, Mr. Gao, let me come to you, and I want to pick your brains on an ongoing crisis between India and China. And we've actually seen a crisis break out over Galwan Valley in May 2020. And since then, we've seen over 20 rounds of core commander level talks between China and India. Do you really see a possibility where the troops of both sides, China and India, are likely to return to a position of status quo ante, which existed before May 5th of 2020? And if such a thing is unlikely to occur, what do you think are some of the major obstacles in that way?
Thank you very much for raising these very important questions. Indeed, there are territorial disputes between China and India, but allow me to emphasize that these territorial disputes were not created by China or by India. They were created by the British Indian colonists, and neither China nor India should be held hostage by this bad legacy left over by the British. And I do hope China and India will have enough courage and wisdom to resolve their territorial disputes in peace rather than resorting to war. War between China and India, both have a population of more than 1.4 billion, will be a true catastrophe for mankind as a whole. Further, if you look at the geography on the ground, I would say the biggest enemy of India is not China. The biggest enemy of India is the terrain. How can you really indulge in fantasy that the Indian soldiers can fight a war against the mighty Himalaya? It's not possible, because if you try that, it will fail. And if you do not believe that you cannot fight the terrain like the mighty Himalaya, try again and again, and then you will be defeated. Because that's simple. Just go to a war college and analyze the war skills and campaign skills, 1, 2, 3, for example. You should come to the conclusion that you never want to fight against the mighty Himalaya as India is faced with. And it will be much better if China and India can really resort to peace and sanity to solve the territorial disputes between them. On the other hand, I think both China and India are members of the South Shanghai Cooperation Organization. We are both BRICS members, for example. There are plentiful of opportunities and platforms for which we can talk and negotiate and try to reach amicable solutions of whatever differences there are between China and India. On the other hand, I do hope India will have enough wisdom and independence to come to the conclusion that it is not in India's own interest to be hijacked onto the bandwagon of other countries in its hostility against China. And I do hope India will continue to practice an independent foreign policy rather than being hijacked as a party bound onto the bandwagon of another country against China. Therefore, between China and India, the only right way going forward is to maintain peaceful relations and resolve whatever problems there are between the two countries in peaceful negotiations, rather than resorting to war. War is suicidal for India.
And in terms of the positions, before I move to my last question, in terms of the positions that actually exist on the ground, you do not see any headway taking place as of now or in the near future.
Well, between China and India, there is a very important understanding that whatever clashes that might happen along the border between the two militaries, they should not use real weapons, for example, firing shots at each other. They should avoid such hostilities to start with. And if, unfortunately, hostilities do break out, they should be restricted to physical hostilities, like by fists and your four limbs rather than anything else. And I think this sets a floor and the ceiling to whatever hostilities that might take place between China and India along the border. Countries in other parts of the world were dumbfounded as to why China and India have agreed to such a very low level of hostilities against each other. But on the other hand, if you just imagine war really breaks out between China and the Indian military, what will be the consequences and what will be the huge cost? I would say neither China nor India can afford to have a full-blown out war along the border. And the fact that China today is already about 6 times as big as the Indian economy also speaks very eloquently for no war between China and India, in addition to Himalaya being such an important geography that Indian soldiers and troops need to really fully take into consideration if they want to indulge in the fantasy that they can really engage China in the military operations. No, it's not possible. It will result in the suicide of India if they really try to do any military adventure against China along the Himalaya. And I do hope India and China will have enough wisdom to think about using peaceful means to resolve their differences, whatever they are, rather than resorting to war. War is going to be mutually destructive against both China and India.
Dr. Gao and Dr. Mohit, let's speak of Pakistan and China relations. Recently, we've had Vice Foreign Minister Sun Weidong, who visited Pakistan and co-chaired the meeting of the Joint Working Group on International Cooperation and Coordination, and it deliberated on the, and I quote, third-party participation in the development of CPEC. Do you think both countries can substantively work together to bring in third parties in form of, foreign investments, and especially, a greater footprint in the special economic zones?
I was
Professor
in
Gar?
Pakistan in November 2023, and I met with many of your media agencies and think tanks in Islamabad. And my personal impression is that China and India and the Chinese people and the Indian people are true brothers and sisters towards each other. We can really support each other for mutual benefit. I would say CPEC is actually the signature and the most important projects among all the BRI projects involving more. And when you look at CPEC in terms of its size, its magnitude, its sustainability, its lasting impact on Pakistan, it will truly be a landmark deal for Pakistan in terms of growing its manufacturing capacities, growing its connectivity of all kinds, and promoting connectivity between China and Pakistan. I think lots of other countries will be interested in participating in that, especially if we focus on the connectivity in terms of energy connectivity, piping crude oil or natural gas from the Guadar port all the way to Kashgar in China, for example. And I would not be surprised if major oil producing countries, gas producing countries in the Middle East would be very interested in having a stake. And the fact that there will be huge amount of manufacturing capacities to be put into place in Pakistan along the CPEC lines, for example, also indicate that many other countries, if they participate in the CPEC project, will benefit because they will have meaningful roles to play, not only in connectivity, but also in manufacturing capacities of all kinds, of many different products to be produced in Pakistan. And the fact that they will create lots of high-paying jobs for the Pakistani people, which will really make sure that the Pakistani nation will benefit from the massive amount of investments led by China, but maybe followed by many other countries, especially oil producing and gas producing countries in the Middle East, is a sure sign that CPEC has sustainability and is positioned to take off more and more so in the future.
Now, Dr. Mohit, can I also have your views on this as well? Because recently you've also come out with a report on geoeconomics. What do you think would be needed by both sides, and particularly Pakistan, to double down on such efforts?
Look, first of all, CPEC is integral to connectivity between China and Pakistan and the rest of the region. If you want an ideal scenario, in northwest connectivity corridor should be linking up with an east-west connectivity corridor. But just because we don't have an east-west connectivity corridor does not mean then that we do not invest fully in a north-south corridor. Now, I am actually a big proponent of bringing in other countries into CPEC and making it a multinational initiative. In fact, one of the reasons that CPEC has been opposed by many in the West is that they feel that this is China-Pakistan's collaboration against the West. And that was never the idea. What is CPEC? It is actually infrastructure. It's roads, it's energy, it's going to be special economic zones. And both China and Pakistan have an interest in bringing any and every investment into it, which will benefit connectivity, Pakistan, and China as well. The other part of this is that if you want to really be a geoeconomic hub and build around connectivity in the region, there is no reason to not allow other investors to come in. Even now, CPEC projects have had GE turbines powering Chinese investment into power projects. CPEC's extension to Afghanistan is something both China and Pakistan have talked about. And again, I'm proponent of that. Why? Because once you create that extension, you create more connectivity into and out of Afghanistan, which is necessary for countries if they want to benefit from Afghanistan's economy, mines and minerals, etc. So both in terms of economic prowess, and in terms of changing this negative perception of CPEC in the West, I think it's imperative that we open it up and market it as a global initiative. And in fact, I would argue both China and Pakistan have tried to do that. And that's really the signal that we've been sending, that this is infrastructure, this is capacity that everybody should benefit from. And of course, China and Pakistan will be the biggest beneficiaries because it's our territories and our connectivity foremost. So I do think we should move in that direction. That also aligns with China's interest of cooperation, not contestation, and Pakistan's geoeconomic vision.
As you mentioned, the conversation has been taking place, but to sort of build on that, what steps really need to be taken that you think can actually allow for more concrete steps to follow?
Personally, I think there are two. One is better coordinated communication about CPEC, about CPEC's intention, about CPEC's future plans, about what Gwadar is going to be, about what the special economic zones offer. And second, head down, focused on building the special economic zones and the agricultural sector as has been envisioned in CPEC. You can market without substance, it won't work. You can put substance in and have bad marketing, it won't work. So for Pakistan and China, it's imperative to get these special economic zones off the ground as soon as possible, prioritize right, and then market to the world to take advantage of the opportunities created.
Mr. Victor Gao, Dr. Moeed Yusuf, I really thank you both for having joined us today on Info Talks for this special edition.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this conversation with Dr. Moeed and Mr. Victor Gao. Our team works very hard to make this work possible, and it would mean the world to us if you could like and share our content. And if you'd like to stay informed about our upcoming podcasts and other work, please hit the bell icon.